Hello and welcome to day 4 of Food Integrity. I do hope you've been enjoying this week as much as I have. We've been truly spoilt over the last 3 days with an abundance of experts bringing their insight and know-how to the floor. So why stop now? We have a tremendous lineup ahead of us with today's theme, novel foods and trends, and I can't wait to get started. This morning, we'll be welcoming leaders within the cannabis, CBD and hemp arena, and later exploring the depths of nutrition, Industry 4.0 and beverage trends, to name just a few. Make sure to check out the agenda, and don't worry, if you can't make it on time, everything's available on Catch Up. Just a couple of features to make you aware of before I pass over to our keynote speaker. We want to make this event as engaging as possible, so please do make sure to get involved by asking questions throughout sessions, voting in polls and connecting with others. I also recommend taking a moment to visit our poster room where you can view the brilliant submissions we've received. So make yourself a coffee, have a look around and enjoy. You can also book a meeting with our sponsors. Simply click on the sponsors and exhibitors on the menu at the top of your screen and then onto the company name you're keen to connect with. So let's get started. I'd like to introduce the brilliant Robert Verkerk, Executive and Scientific Director at Alliance for Natural Health International, who will be kicking things off. Rob, welcome.
Thank you so much, Beth. Wonderful to be with you. At least it's a very sunny morning here in the UK. I hope it is elsewhere for those of you. We are going to dive deeply into this complex area, but in a very, very short period of time. And we're going to see as many of you as possible in what I think will be a fascinating panel discussion that I'll be moderating. Very briefly, I'm talking to you today with my non-profit hat on, the Alliance for Natural Health International. We've been protecting, promoting natural health internationally for some 20 years now. I also work as a consultant for a wide range of players in the natural product sector, and I'm the founding member of a new charity that works at providing nutrition solutions, particularly to narrow health inequalities. For those of you who are not familiar, this is always an interesting way of depicting the regulatory environment we deal with in Europe, especially for an American audience, because they cannot believe how complex the various ring fences are. And of course, we've got the really important underlying legislation like general food law, nutrition health claims regulations, food information for consumers. I want to draw attention to the two key roadblocks that we often see, the novel food regulation and also the borderline between foods and medicines through the Human Medicinal Products Directive. The complicating problem for many products is that to some degree novel foods can present a bigger barrier because it's just a binary system. If you've got any amount of a particular ingredient that's determined as novel in one or more member states, for example, you have an immediate roadblock. In the case of medicines, we've been doing much of this work over the last 15 years. There's often an argument, even if you have an ingredient, a botanical product that may be medicinal in some contexts, you can sometimes argue that the dosage and the claims, the overall presentation of that sometimes medicinal ingredient makes it non-medicinal in a specific context. That's not possible for novel foods. So this borderline presents an ongoing problem between foods and medicines. One of the difficulties is you have an ingredient that is both legally either befits the presentation limb or the functional limb of the medicines directive, but it also fulfills the definition of a novel food. You'll see that there has been a number of pieces of case law that have determined medicines will have supremacy over novel foods. And of course, that is relevant for cannabis, particularly in a medicinal context. The history, I think, is important to understand where this regulation comes from. A lot of people have forgotten that one of the triggers for it was actually the commercialization of genetically modified organisms. But of course, as with so much European law, it's all about free movement, and it's all about consumer protection. And of course, what we've seen is this massive growth of CBD and other cannabinoids, and a massive now imposition to their free movement, and certainly not a lot of evidence that people are being harmed at the same time. It's presented a major challenge for many botanicals. We've seen the kind of drama that was caused with stevia up until authorization occurred in 2011, and that happened only when different players came together. We've seen other problems with goji, for example, and even chia seeds. And of course, overall, what happened was that, particularly with the Baobab case, that really showed that where you had traditional use outside the European Union, there was a strong justification for a simplified regime, which has now happened with the new regulation. We've seen a system that probably, and it's very clear now in the environment of CBD, that SMEs have much more of a struggle because of the regulatory hurdles, the lack of maturity of some of the science around it than some of the big players. We now have the union list, and the cannabinoid situation, I think, is going to be a fascinating future for how novel foods get recognized. When you look at the applications to date, some 139, you'll see that micronutrients, various plant foods, HMOs, plant extracts, and now, of course, edible insects are the big players. What's also interesting, a lot of companies have struggled with investing sometimes millions into getting an application because they're concerned about data protection. And you'll see now that some 53% of applications have been protected. So it certainly is a way of getting some ROI if you do decide to protect your application. One of the complicating aspects when you look at the precedents is that cannabinoids exist in nature, both endogenously within our bodies and obviously exogenously. We consume them in a whole range of plants. We've got a whole bunch of receptors, CB1, CB2 receptors in our bodies, and it's not just cannabis that provides an important source of these cannabinoids. Echinacea is probably one of the, and cacao. They're not just phytocannabinoids themselves, they can also be mimetics that behave like that and talk to these receptors. So it's a very big area, and there's a lot of feel-good factor. I think the key driver that's really caused such rapid growth in this area is because people feel so good. And my goodness, after people being under house arrest for so long, there are a lot of people who want to benefit from taking cannabinoids. Obviously, we've seen this big distinction between different sectors of the cannabis industry, from medical cannabis that is really now quite rightly taking off. Obviously, also the recreational side, which I'm a Dutch national. I grew up knowing about coffee shops. That hasn't taken off in other parts of the world. But it's really these other uses, industrial cannabis, and also this fast-growing area of health products, also cosmetics and clothing, that is of great interest. Drama obviously occurred in January 2019 when the Novel Foods Catalog determined that CBD and other cannabinoids were viewed as novel. Obviously, they weren't authorized. And you'll see there was obviously a clear determination also that synthetic cannabinoids would also be considered novel. But of course, CB Depot had already made an application. And it's potentially something we're going to be talking about in the panel, potentially much easier when you're dealing with a synthetic analog. But does that reflect the consumer demand? We then have a series of cases. This was a case that was passed in the European Court in May 2020 on the French case. saying that it was it was really not just fiber and seeds that could be used as the key source of cannabis. We then saw in July 2020 the European Commission put a pause on all the applications because of a concern that the UN Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs would view CBD as a drug. Then the Commission on Narcotic Drugs in December said, no, it's not a drug, saying it actually extracts less than 2% THC, shouldn't be subject to international controls. And of course, in that environment, with Brexit happening, the UK suddenly looked like it might be a great safe harbor. And of course, we've now seen the 31st of March deadline set by the UK Food Standards Agency pass. We see only 23 products coming through with validated applications. Only 11 of those are primary applications. The Irish pharma company run by Chanel McCoy has been a very big winner with that, with their Pure is ultra pure CBD. We've got 12 secondary applications are also through. So only 3 companies getting through the door, yet we know there are probably close on 1,000 applications. And again, that's something we want to dissect during the panel discussion. So it really brings us to this extraordinary conundrum over the future of cannabinoids around novel foods. On one side, we've got the laws, the difference in views between different member states, different parts of the world, different legal interpretations. On the other side, we've also got the issues around scientific data. Do we have sufficient methodology? Are the methodologies sufficiently mature? Do companies understand where, is the guidance sufficient, or are there just inadequacies in terms of the technical skill base that companies are using to try and negotiate these barriers? And of course, on the other side, we want to try and make sure that trade barriers, that the single market, certainly in Europe, functions properly and within the European Economic Area, but at the same time, maintaining consumer safety. And of course, there have been a lot of cowboys on the market. So how can you deal with the cowboys at the same time? And finally, in managing this whole framework, how do we work a system that doesn't disadvantage the smaller companies, which in the natural product sector have been some of the biggest innovators? So at the moment, there is a risk that it is the big players that will do very well and the SMEs that will be left out in the cold. And we really end up with a scenario in which there are probably a lot more questions than answers. And I've just posed a few of them here. What will happen in relation to CBD extracts that are full spectrum versus CBD isolates? If I'm selling a company, a product containing CBD, how many markets can I sell it in? Are we going to approach something that's close to harmonization? What's going to happen to the UK in relation to the FSA's program? Will that assist what's going to be picked up by EFSA as applications start to be reviewed again? Will we be able to see free movement within the EEA and the EU? As a manufacturer, will I have to just source ingredients from a very limited number of players? And will that tend to be isolates or synthetics? What can I say about my products? How's the health claims regulation going to pick up this? How will we move forward with Article 13.5 claims, for example? And of course, for some products that are turned into emulsions, is it possible that I'll not only have to negotiate novel food authorization, I'll also have to negotiate the very complex area of nanomaterial evaluation, which obviously has its own guidance in EFSA. So at that point, I just want to draw your attention to the fact that We're going to be having a fascinating discussion starting at 9, and we look forward to having loads of questions. So thank you very much indeed.
Oh, thank you so much, Rob. That really set the tone for day 4. I can't believe it's day 4. But such an interesting topic of discussion. As you said, there's just so many questions around this, and I'm really looking forward to hopefully answering some of those in our next session. So as Rob said, he'll be joining us again in a few moments time for our first panel, the rise of cannabis, CBD and hemp, and I am so excited for this. So stay tuned, and I will see you at 9 a.m. UK time.